Hello everyone, today I will tell true horror stories about everyday life. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Years ago, I had the opportunity to visit an old, abandoned mansion known as Blackwood Manor. It was a massive, Gothic structure sitting isolated in the middle of a dense forest. The locals avoided it, whispering about a curse that had plagued the family who once lived there. Intrigued by the stories, I decided to explore the manor. The moment I stepped through the iron gates, a sense of foreboding washed over me. The air was thick and heavy, and the silence was almost tangible. I made my way up the overgrown path to the front door, which creaked ominously as I pushed it open. Inside, the house was frozen in time. Dust-covered furniture, cobwebs hanging from chandeliers, and faded portraits on the walls all hinted at a once grand, but now forgotten past. As I explored room after room, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. In the grand library, I found an old journal belonging to the last owner, Lord William Blackwood. The entries detailed a series of tragic events that had befallen his family. One by one, his loved ones had died under mysterious circumstances. A drowning in the nearby lake, a fall from the attic stairs, and a sudden unexplained illness. The final entry was particularly chilling. Lord Blackwood wrote about a dark figure that appeared in the manor at night, whispering terrible things and driving him to madness. He believed the figure was the embodiment of a curse placed on the family generations ago by a wronged servant. As I read the journal, I heard a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the hallway. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. The tapping led me to the grand staircase, and as I looked up, I saw a shadowy figure at the top. It was tall, cloaked in darkness, and its eyes glowed with an eerie light. Frozen in fear, I watched as the figure slowly descended the stairs, its gaze never leaving mine. I could hear whispers, just as Lord Blackwood described, filling my head with thoughts of despair and doom. I knew I had to get out before it was too late. I turned and ran, stumbling through the dark hallways and crashing through the front door. I didn't stop running until I was far from the manor, gasping for breath and trembling with terror. When I told the locals about my experience, they nodded solemnly. They said no one who entered Blackwood Manor ever left unscathed. The curse, they believed, was real, and it claimed anyone who dared to disturb the resting place of the Blackwood family. To this day, I can't forget the haunting presence of that dark figure and the overwhelming sense of doom that filled Blackwood Manor. The curse is real, and it still lingers in the shadows of that forsaken mansion, waiting for its next victim. It was a cold autumn day when I first heard about Ravenswood Asylum. The old psychiatric hospital had been abandoned for decades, and locals spoke of it in hushed tones, claiming it was haunted by the spirits of former patients. Being a skeptic and a lover of thrill, I decided to investigate the asylum myself. The asylum was located deep in the woods, its crumbling facade barely visible through the thick trees. As I approached, I felt an inexplicable chill, as if the very air around the building was heavy with sorrow and despair. Inside, the asylum was a maze of decaying hallways and empty rooms. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and the floors were littered with broken furniture and medical equipment. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling. As I wandered through the dark corridors, I found myself drawn to a room at the end of a long hallway. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, I found a collection of old patient records. The files were brittle and yellowed with age, detailing the tragic lives of those who had been committed to Ravenswood. One file in particular caught my eye. It belonged to a young woman named Emily Hart, who had been admitted in the 1920s. The notes described her as suffering from severe paranoia and hallucinations, claiming to see shadowy figures that no one else could see. She had died under mysterious circumstances, and her death was never fully explained. As I read, I heard a faint whisper behind me. I turned quickly, but the hallway was empty. Shaking off the unease, I continued exploring, eventually making my way to the basement, where the most disturbing events were said to have occurred. The basement was dark and damp, with a series of small, windowless cells that once held the most disturbed patients. As I walked through, I felt a sudden drop in temperature, and the whispers returned, louder this time. They seemed to echo off the walls, indistinct and haunting. I reached the end of the basement corridor and found a large iron door. Pushing it open, I entered what appeared to be a morgue. The cold was unbearable, and the air felt thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me, and the lights flickered out. In the pitch darkness, I could hear footsteps and the sound of metal scraping against metal. Panic set in, and I fumbled for my flashlight. When I finally managed to turn it on, the beam revealed a figure standing in the corner of the room. It was a woman, her face pale and gaunt, dressed in a tattered hospital gown. Her eyes were hollow and filled with anguish. She moved towards me, her mouth forming silent words. I was rooted to the spot, unable to move as she reached out her hand. Just as she was about to touch me, the lights flickered back on, and she vanished. I bolted from the basement, desperate to escape the asylum. When I finally made it outside, I collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. The locals later told me that Emily Hart's spirit was known to haunt the asylum, searching for peace she never found in life. Ravenswood Asylum remains abandoned, a monument to the suffering of its former patients. Those who dare to enter are warned of the restless spirits that linger within its walls and the whispers of the past that still echo through the halls. I'll never forget the haunted look in Emily's eyes and the chilling whispers that followed me out of that forsaken place. One late July evening, I found myself drawn to Grimwood Cemetery. It was a place of legend, steeped in stories of restless spirits and unexplained phenomena. As an amateur paranormal investigator, I couldn't resist the allure of such a haunted location. The cemetery was old, with weathered tombstones and towering oaks that cast eerie shadows in the moonlight. A heavy mist hung in the air, adding to the sense of foreboding that seemed to envelop the place. I walked slowly among the graves, my flashlight casting long beams of light that barely pierced the darkness. As I ventured deeper into the cemetery, I came across an old, ornate mausoleum. Its iron gates were ajar, and curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the gates open and stepped inside. The air was musty, and the only sound was the faint drip of water from somewhere within the stone walls. In the center of the mausoleum was a large stone sarcophagus. I felt a sudden chill as I approached it, as if an unseen presence was warning me to stay away. Ignoring the feeling, I placed my hand on the cold stone surface and immediately felt a jolt, like an electric shock. I pulled my hand back, and the room seemed to grow even colder. Suddenly, a soft, mournful wail echoed through the mausoleum. I turned around and saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was a woman, dressed in a flowing white gown, her face pale and expressionless. Her eyes were dark and empty, and her presence sent a shiver down my spine. She began to glide towards me, her feet not touching the ground. I tried to move, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. As she came closer, I could see the sadness etched into her ghostly features. She stopped a few feet from me and raised her hand, pointing towards the sarcophagus. Gathering my courage, I forced myself to speak. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't respond verbally, but in my mind, I heard her voice clear as day. "Release me," she said, her voice filled with anguish. "I am trapped in this place, bound by a curse. Set me free." I looked back at the sarcophagus, realizing that it might hold the key to her freedom. I examined the surface and noticed an inscription in Latin, using my phone. I translated the words, "Here lies Evelyn Blackwood, cursed to wander until the wrongs of the past are righted." I knew what I had to do. I found a small latch on the side of the sarcophagus and opened it. Inside, I discovered an old, tattered diary. It belonged to Evelyn Blackwood, detailing her tragic life and the betrayal that led to her curse. She had been wrongfully accused of witchcraft and buried alive by the townspeople. With a heavy heart, I read the final entry, where Evelyn pleaded for forgiveness and peace. I took the diary and promised to tell her story, to clear her name and lift the curse that bound her to this world. As I spoke the words aloud, the apparition of Evelyn began to fade. She smiled, a look of relief washing over her face. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she was gone. The air in the mausoleum grew warmer, and the oppressive feeling lifted. I left Grimwood Cemetery that night, determined to honor my promise. I shared Evelyn's story with the local historical society, and they erected a monument in her memory, acknowledging the injustice she had suffered. The sightings of Evelyn ceased, and the cemetery became a place of peace once more. I'll never forget the look of gratitude in her eyes, and the lesson that sometimes the dead just need someone to listen and set them free. I never believed in ghosts until I experienced something that changed my mind forever. This is my story, and it happened just a few years ago when I moved into an old house on Pine Street. The house was a charming Victorian with a wraparound porch and large, creaky rooms. It was the kind of place you'd imagine in a ghost story, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I was just excited to start a new chapter in my life. The first few nights were uneventful. I spent my time unpacking and getting settled. But then, strange things started happening. It began with small noises, footsteps in the hallway when I knew I was alone, doors creaking open on their own, and whispers that seemed to come from the walls. One night, as I was reading in bed, I heard a loud bang from the attic. My heart raced as I grabbed a flashlight and made my way up the narrow staircase. The attic was filled with old furniture and dusty boxes. As I shone the light around, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the corner of the room, there was a rocking chair, and it was moving on its own. I backed away slowly, trying to convince myself it was just the wind. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. Over the next few weeks, the activity intensified. I would wake up in the middle of the night to find my bedroom door wide open, even though I had locked it before bed. Objects would move around the house, and sometimes I would see shadows darting out of the corner of my eye. The final straw came one evening when I was having dinner in the kitchen. The lights began to flicker, and I felt an icy chill in the air. Suddenly, all the doors in the house slammed shut, and I heard a low, menacing growl coming from the basement. I was paralyzed with fear, but I knew I had to leave. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the house, not stopping until I was safely in my car. I never went back to that house on Pine Street. I later learned that the previous owners had also experienced strange occurrences and had left abruptly. Some said the house was cursed, built on land that was once a burial ground. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that house, but I know one thing for sure. There are things in this world that we cannot understand, and sometimes it's best to leave them alone. Living in the countryside always seemed idyllic to me. Fresh air, open spaces, and a sense of peace that city life couldn't offer. That was until I encountered the phantom of Hollow Creek. I had just moved into a quaint cottage near the edge of the forest, not far from a meandering stream known locally as Hollow Creek. The locals often spoke of strange happenings around the creek, but I dismissed them as mere folklore. The first few weeks were peaceful, filled with the sound of birds and the rustling of leaves. Then, one foggy evening, as I was sitting on the porch, I saw a figure by the creek. It was a woman, dressed in an old-fashioned white gown, walking along the water's edge. I called out to her, but she didn't respond. She just kept walking until she disappeared into the mist. The next day,